Good afternoon. I am Carmen Bolden of the 6 Degrees of Edgar Allan Poe, and we are here today with Charles Wissinger. And I had the privilege last night of seeing him play Poe, and it was amazing. And we were actually here talking at the Hermitage, where he performed as Poe. And so, Charles, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am an actor. Went to college as a theatrical and performing arts major with an art minor. I started acting in middle school, and then with love of history, I fell into a couple of organizations and then made that my primary job for a very long time.
Very neat.
And developed a lot of characters to be able to present an education through entertainment to others.
That is awesome. So how did you get into playing Poe?
Poe. Well, it's a long story. I don't want to bore you, but at the same time, I was an actor coming right out of college with an acting degree, and I started working in a theater, and the owner, manager, director, he said, "Have you ever thought about doing living history?"
Oh, neat. Okay.
And I said, well, no, but I do like history. What's this entail? So he, as I understood at that time, worked at St. John's Church, historic St. John's Church, doing the reenactment of Patrick Henry's speech.
Okay.
He said, "Have you even thought of doing this show?" I said, "I've never heard of it."
Okay.
And I've lived in, the Richmond area almost all my life, and I didn't know it happened.
I think we take advantage of the towns we live in.
We
and
do.
Don't explore those things. But
but eventually, as time was going on, I started to develop characters and working for him. And then with a local historic filming groups, one specifically, they cast me as Edgar Allan Poe.
Nice.
And then it was one of those, he's a Richmonder. I need to learn more about him. I'm playing him now. Let me see if I can continue to play.
Yeah.
And I started doing research, and that's how it all started.
That is really cool. And I think one of the things that we were talking about last night, because I wore a dress that I sewed myself, and because they know I talk about those kind of things all the time, that you are a tailor yourself, and if you'll talk about the Poe vest.
Sure. So getting into sewing, I actually started in high school home economics class.
Nice.
And it's a class I don't know that they even offer anymore.
Unfortunately,
in most
they
classes.
do not.
So learning how to sew, and then it was just something that, I know how, put it aside.
Yeah.
I started working at St. John's Church. No one had really repaired or fixed or made new some of those outfits in years.
Oh, wow.
And there was nothing really that fit me that wasn't dry rotting, falling apart, or the buttons were falling off.
Oh, wow.
So I took it upon myself to, experiment. I can do it. Let's see. And then I showed my manager, the same guy, and he said, "Have you ever thought about doing this with real patterns? If I gave you the pattern, would you do it?" And so that's how it started.
Okay.
With the Poe vest specifically, I try to do as much research as possible with every character that I portray to figure out what's the most common outfit that they would have worn, what's the common material, most of the time wool or linens, and then trying to best replicate it without killing myself, trying to do it all by hand.
Absolutely.
So some of it on the inside is machine sewn.
Okay.
Some of it on the outside is machine sewn. I will, admit.
Yes.
But I try to get it as detail oriented as possible
With
to
the
get
historic
close.
aspect, yes.
Right.
Okay.
And sometimes we don't have enough information and we have to fudge it.
Yeah.
With the vest, we actually have, and I say by we, the Poe Museum in Richmond has the actual vest, the white vest with all the brocade. And I found it, fell in love with it.
It's beautiful. If you have not been to Richmond, to the Poe Museum, you have to go see this vest.
Taking pictures of it, because they allowed me to, without flash, and then replicating it to make it as close as possible,
Okay.
as I can possibly do it. And I consider myself an amateur tailor.
Yeah. Well,
But-
work you did on it, it's beautiful.
Well,
It's
thank you.
absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
Yes, loved that you had it on. So, kind of like going back to kind of influences when you were younger, and everybody kind of, I think, kind of has Poe come into their life, around junior high, middle school, however age you are. So, how did you get hooked on Poe? Like, was it younger, older?
Well, in school, you learn about it. In school, you're taught some things, but in some cases, they don't go in depth.
Right.
And so there was a brief knowledge of Poe.
Okay.
Fascinating, interesting individual, but do we know the actual story of Poe? Do we study the biography? And the answer is really no. They don't focus on it. They focus on his writing.
Absolutely.
And so, okay, I know him.
Yeah.
But it's not until much later that I actually, with being cast as Poe, trying to research the individual before filming to say, okay, how do I want to play this? What was he? Who was he? What do other people say about him? So that you can bring it to life when you're filming.
Absolutely.
And with that, there was a connection with reading, especially as an actor, trying to put myself in that spot, in that person, and trying to say, would I be happy with the presentation I'd give as him?
Right.
Is this something that I think I could actually do to portray? Can I see myself there? And the answer was yes.
Okay.
And so that's where it came from.
Well, and it definitely resonated on the stage last night, because you could tell that you did the very detailed research and, separated the facts versus the myths.
Yeah.
And of, what is his name?
Rufus
Griswold.
Griswold.
I was
Yes.
about to say it correctly and then, messed up. Anyway.
That's all right. That's all right.
But, and so I thought it was amazing. Just,
Well, thank you.
Yes, did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Let's see. So, do you play other characters? I think that our listeners would love to hear about that because they love Poe, very interested in everything about him, but it's wonderful to tie into the other historical aspects of what went on before, during, and after him with other people. So
Sure. I started out, as I mentioned, working at St. John's Church.
Okay.
So there's a lot of knowledge since about 2003, I think,
Okay.
of Patrick Henry. It's not until, I would say, closer to 2014,
Okay.
something like that, that I actually started to portray in the reenactment Patrick Henry.
Okay.
And so with that knowledge, knowing the actual speech, I will occasionally hire myself out
Nice.
to be Patrick Henry
Yeah.
because I can bring some of that knowledge that I have as well as do the speech to audiences that don't necessarily always have the opportunity to come to the church to see the reenactment.
Okay. Yes.
So I have done that.
Okay.
With that being said, I do not consider myself the perfect Patrick Henry. Yes, I do like history a lot. I'm not tall enough, number one.
Yeah. How tall was he?
6'1", 6'2".
Oh wow, he was
something
really
like
tall.
that.
Okay. Okay.
So
I didn't know that.
and he was a redhead.
Okay.
So I'm not really one to say that I'm the perfect Patrick Henry at all, but I do know it. So
Yeah.
I consider myself more of a, I'm telling his story instead of trying to portray him. Unlike Poe, where I try to actually bring more life to someone who's been expressed as very morbid, very dark, and very off-putting when he wasn't.
Right. Exactly.
Then, of course, Edgar Allan Poe, as you know. The Marquis de Lafayette. I do a lot of the younger Marquis. And I'm working on expanding a little bit only because next year we have the anniversary of his last tour of the United States.
Okay. Okay.
So I will be a part of that.
That will be really neat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Myself and, as I understand it, a handful of other Lafayettes will be hired in rotation to go to as many of the sites as possible where he actually made his tour.
So doing
the
the actual tour.
Yes.
Oh, that will be amazing.
So not available for all of them, so I can't tell you where I'll be because I don't know yet.
And once you have that information, we can share it out.
Hopefully.
Absolutely. And I think there's a little connection with Poe, with him.
Yes.
Do you want to share that?
Well, sure. There is a connection. It starts before he was even born. David Poe Sr. in Baltimore was in charge of a regiment in the Continental Army, and he supplied Lafayette as Lafayette was coming through from New York into Virginia, and supplying them with outfits and other things that they would need, equipment, so that they could come into Virginia. And hopefully, the original plan was to capture Benedict Arnold, but it ultimately turns into capturing Cornwallis at Yorktown.
That's really neat.
Years later, when when Lafayette is making his tour of the United States in 1824, 1825, he stops in Richmond, and with the youth militia, he talks to them individually, hand selects 6 of them, and one of the people that he selects is Edgar Allan Poe. Because of the Poe name, he recognized it from David Poe.
His grandfather, yes.
Asked him, is he your relative? And sure enough, he was. So there was that connection. They became a honor guard for Lafayette while they went through Richmond. So his personal private entourage.
Yes. It's so neat. And I don't think a lot of people know this about Poe. So that's why I wanted you to share it. So.
Oh, yeah, sure. So there is that connection. As far as some of the other characters that I play, just to get back to that.
Yes, absolutely.
Francis Scott Key. I do know of a couple of people that play Francis Scott Key. And I try to do it from a unique perspective, but he's one of those that Baltimore native. So not that far from home. So I don't mind actually doing that and telling that story. And then Audie Murphy. The most decorated American soldier from World War II.
Do you have a favorite that you play?
I like all of them for different reasons.
That makes sense.
With Poe, it's interesting to see the reaction from the people, to be able to bring to life, make him more likable, to make him more of a witty, bringing my own humor to it. Because in all accounts that I've read from his friends, they did like him as far as a witty, very athletic, very personable individual, not off-putting at all. And same thing with Lafayette. It's somebody that people wanted to be around, not just because of the name, not just because he was the hero of 2 nations, but because he was someone that they enjoyed their company. So I do enjoy those people.
No, that kind of makes sense. And and I think a lot of people don't realize that Poe was very funny and humorous, and people did generally like him. And then the ones that didn't like him were more about him criticizing their work and all of those things that happen in that type of literary world.
Sure. And he was not kind to everyone that he critiqued.
Not exactly. So, I think it'll be really cool to see you in some other of your roles. And we were talking before starting the interview, and found out that he was playing Lafayette at the Poe birthday bash in 2020, which my husband and I attended. And so he found his picture, and we were like, oh my gosh, we were there at the same time, and I remember you. So I don't know if I met you then, but it's a small world, and Poe brings people together.
And now we're interviewing in Nashville.
Exactly. It's really cool. So kind of tying back to Richmond, you've done a lot of work with the Poe Museum and research there and things like that. So what are some of the most interesting artifacts that you've been able to see at the museum? I've been there and, seen some at the birthday bash. And then I previously before that, I just went in and did like just the self-guided kind of tour. And so I've seen some of the things, but I haven't seen everything. So what...
That's hard to say. I would say the vest is key.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have this image of Poe as wearing dark drab colors, mostly because everything is black and white. You don't know what colors they were.
Absolutely.
But we also have this morbid sense that he always wore dark black or gray or charcoal or something, and it's, I think, a misnomer.
I think you're right.
Because we want to see him as the dark Gothic individual that everyone plays him out to be.
People are like, OG, the original Goth.
Right. But he wasn't all the time. So to see the white silk vest that they have behind the glass, and to see that it is brocade, it is an elegant, it's an evening wear for sure.
Absolutely.
So he did dress up, and it's white, and you don't see any pictures of him wearing it.
No.
But he did.
Yes, exactly.
And the fact that it's still in excellent condition. Behind the glass, no stains.
I know.
How often did he wear it? Did he buy it late and not get a chance to wear it? Who knows? So it's those kinds of things that I think it make him more of a real individual.
I agree. And you kind of wonder too, I'm sure like Muddy probably did work on his clothes, to mend them and things like that when they would get a little tattered and stuff.
Yeah. So I think that would probably be one of the most interesting.
Okay.
And you don't think about it. You go to these museums and you see somebody's glasses, spectacles, whatever. But at the Poe Museum in Richmond, his socks.
Yeah.
And it kind of, grounds him
yes.
as like a real person.
We love the puns.
Because it does, he was just an average person like everyone else.
Absolutely, yes.
And the fact that they still survive.
Yes.
But it's because he left all that stuff behind in Richmond when he went up to New York, or tried to make his way to New York to collect the rest of his stuff and then move back down to Richmond. And that's the only reason why all of those things remain in Richmond, because he left them behind on purpose.
Exactly, yeah.
It's interesting. It's fascinating to me.
It really is. And the one thing that you mentioned last night kind of about, and I hadn't really thought about this, but I've heard of him wearing hats, but not like you don't focus on it because there's no pictures of it. And I love that you brought that up last night, that how you style your hair, and when you look at the Poe's daguerreotypes that were made of him, that you can tell that's why his hair did what it did, because he's obviously had a hat on.
Sure. Well,
and so I wish there was a hat that still was in existence.
It's fascinating when you do the research, and this is another one of those things, as I mentioned last night, and I'll do it again for you. You never know what hat people wore.
Right.
You see these paintings that are supposed to be painted from life, like Lafayette, and you know what outfit that he wore.
Right.
You know generically what colors they were, but you don't know what their hats were.
Right.
Because in portraits and in paintings and even in some photographs, they're never wearing their hats.
No.
And it's interesting that we know what General Washington's hat looked like, because it's not really found in any great detail in any painting or anything from any image that survives, and likewise the same with Lafayette.
Yeah.
And then we have real pictures of Poe.
Right.
And they are the tintypes, the daguerreotypes. They are of him, and you can get an exact sense of his style, his clothing, his demeanor, his look. We know without a death mask, this is what he looked like.
Exactly. Yes.
But then you never see his hat.
I know.
And as I mentioned last night, the leading hats of the time for men, top hats, you've got bowlers, and then you have maybe a handful of other different fashions in the 1840s.
Exactly.
But what would be ideal for Poe? what would he have worn? Who knows?
Yeah.
Would it look too much like Charlie Chaplin to have a bowler?
That's true.
And so then it would be almost comical instead of representing this brooding, dark, morbid individual that people want to see. And then what about a top hat?
Yeah.
So with a top hat, would it look too much like he's trying to be an Abraham Lincoln when he's not?
Exactly.
Would it look too much like he's trying to be, forgive me, the Mad Hatter?
Yes.
And would people now misinterpret the style of hat because this is what we as a actor are choosing for him, not knowing what he would have worn? But at that time, it was almost deemed disrespectful, and that's probably not the right word, ungentlemanly to go outside without a hat on.
Absolutely.
So everyone had a hat outside. And you can see it in even up to 1920s in old footage where you've got the black and white silent movies and everybody outside is wearing some kind of a hat.
Exactly.
So then the question is, what do you do?
Yeah.
So with my presentations, I don't even go that route. I don't try to answer that question.
Exactly.
I don't have a hat for that costume.
Right.
So I style my hair in the idea of his pictures. You know, the curly, wavy hair, kind of a little messed up, because he probably would have had a hat, oily, maybe a little dirty looking.
Yeah.
But pushed down and curled up.
Exactly.
Because his hat would have pushed his hair out and up from the bottom without trying to look too ridiculous when I do it.
Absolutely.
So, it's a lot of thought that I put into
and I love that detail. I mean, it just, because I don't think that's something I had not thought of before. And I love that because, it's just little nuances that you think about of Poe as the man.
Sure.
So,
and that's what I try to do.
Yeah, and you do. And you do it well. Do it very well.
Thank you.
So also kind of tying back to with your research about Poe, what do you think is maybe the most interesting fact or something maybe that, the listeners don't generally know about Poe?
There are a couple of ways that I could answer this question, and it's hard not knowing which way I want to go because everything is fascinating. And it's because we are taught, basically because of Rufus Griswold, we are taught that he is an immoral womanizer, he is an alcoholic, he is dark and brooding, he's always found in cemeteries, he's always thinking about death, which, he kind of was.
Yeah.
And so finding that and then reading the history and mapping it with his actual timeline and the things that were happening in his life that kind of pushed or highlighted the stories that he wrote about.
Yes.
Where he was at a military fort when he wrote things like the underground buried behind a brick wall. And they have these passages underground with dark and dank and bricks in brick wall.
Yeah.
And then people being buried alive. It was not a uncommon, rare thing to think about, but to write about it, that was something different. And he brings that to life, to attention. So everything, I think, would be a little bit fascinating because you get into the nitty-gritty of, wait a minute, maybe this is not the Poe that we've always been taught.
Right, exactly.
Maybe there is more. And for such a unique individual to have such athleticism, to have such stamina, to have yes, he was very opinionated. Yes, he was very maybe considered selfish, maybe narcissistic to a point, but he was still human.
Yes,
he still had his flaws. So
just like everybody else.
Right.
Yeah. He's really kind of a writer of the people.
It can be. So it really is hard to pick any one thing about Poe that stands out as the most fascinating.
Yes.
I think with what I told you last night in the presentation, I don't know and I don't think he was really an alcoholic. And that's probably the most surprising because it's been highlighted, the alcohol, and he was found drunk and stumbling when he died,
Right.
or
Right.
in the gutter, however you want to interpret those
Exactly.
stories. So it's all fascinating.
It really is, and just kind of in my research as well, I do a lot from the Poe Museum, just online, as well as eapoe.org. But it seems like that, from what I could tell, he almost had, like you said, kind of an allergy to alcohol. And
I think so, but we don't know
yes,
for sure.
Right. It alludes to that. And
Sure.
so I think your theory of kind of how he died, I totally agree with.
Well, see, now we're getting into another thing that
I
we didn't tell the listeners.
I know.
So, yes, there are, like I mentioned, over 20 different theories of how he died.
Yes.
But nobody knows really for sure.
Yes.
And some of the theories that come out, some of them are a little wild and far-fetched.
They're
It's hard to
outlandish,
believe.
yes.
Like, rabies. When you read why they got to that conclusion, it's kind of like, okay, I can kind of see where you're coming from, but it looks a little weird, suspicious. But a tumor, who knows?
And that could have been part of it. We
right.
just don't know.
Right, it could have been any number of
illnesses coming up that no one knew
coming
about.
together to be the perfect storm of possibilities.
Yeah.
So I tend to believe, I want to believe, my opinion.
Yes.
With my research, that that's not right. Reading other people's accounts, his closest friends, of one drink would make it seem like he's had 6.
Yes.
And then being what we call even today under the table.
Yes.
So if that is the case, it leans toward alcohol, a allergy.
Yes.
And if that is the case, then it does highlight that if he was maybe found in Baltimore, in a ditch or inside the tavern,
Right.
drunken in the corner and incoherent, murmuring, mumbling,
Exactly.
then maybe it was he had one, maybe he had one too many, maybe it was forced on him. And so,
and that's kind of what I tend to believe, possibly,
maybe
with the cooping aspect.
Right. Well, once again, that's
that's another kind of. I think it kind of added in, like all of it. Yeah.
There is another theory of cooping, and if you put 2 and 2 together, like I mapped out last night, you've got cooping, which is a gang-related political thing that was a thing, where you'd have political gangs who go around taking and capturing, kidnapping, if you will, unsuspected travelers, people that were not necessarily native to that land, that city, that town, and then forcing them by beating them up, filling them with alcohol, maybe even drugs, and going from polling booth to polling booth and voting a specific way. So that is the cooping. And we know that this did exist at the time. Even in Richmond, our first mayor, Fouché, was captured by a cooping gang.
Okay.
And they grew out their thumbnails, carved them to be spikes, and held him by face and threatened him to the point where they were going to, threaten gouging his eyes out.
Oh,
and
my gosh.
Our mayor, Fouché, lost one eye because of it,
Wow.
but got away from his assailants.
That's an interesting
I don't
story.
know what it meant for the elections or what was going on at the time.
Right.
I don't know if it changed anything.
Okay.
But we do know that because of those things, it did happen.
Yes.
And Poe was found in clothes that did not fit him and clean shaven.
Right.
And so we know that from those facts and what was going on at an election in Baltimore at the time, that it's possible that they would have, because Poe had a mustache for the last couple of years of his life, that they would have changed his appearance, changed his clothes, and still forced him to vote a specific way for whatever reason, maybe multiple times.
Absolutely.
To get as much as they could from him.
Yes.
Before they were done with him, and then leave him
Just
at one of the
out.
polling booths or in the gutter or in the tavern or wherever.
Right.
Which is where he was found by someone else.
Yeah, and the reason why I think if that is actually really what happened, thinking about all the facts in the matter, is I would almost think they would have had to have given him alcohol or drugs, because he was such a strong individual unless they did, like you said, with the fingernails or weapons or anything like that, threatening his life, possibly.
Sure.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. But the fact that he arrived in Baltimore, we know that he arrived in Baltimore on his first leg or his leg up to New York, and then he disappears for several days. What happened?
Exactly.
And when he shows up, he's clean shaven. That's very unlike what we know of Poe.
Exactly.
In clothes that did not fit him. So, once again, not like what we know of Poe.
Right.
So where did the clothes come from? So it's a lot of unanswered, weird, and I do put it together to highlight my opinion as the perfect storm of events.
Absolutely.
If you put his allergy to alcohol with cooping with the possibility, then maybe it was just his body couldn't take it and he died from all of these things.
It's his own descent into the maelstrom, if you will.
yes.
But and I really think it's very apropos that he died leaving a mystery that we will probably never solve, and it's sad, it's very bittersweet with thinking about that.
Right, a couple of mysteries.
Yes.
So yes,
absolutely. So talking about mentioning one of his stories, Descent into the Maelstrom. What is your favorite Poe story or poem, or one of each, maybe?
I get this question on average maybe about 50% of the time when I do presentations.
I kind of figured it would be more than that.
Sometimes we don't always get to it.
Okay.
Like with last night, when I open it up to questions, people were like, I don't know what to ask.
Yes.
I've just heard so much and I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, you provide so much for people, and with the reactions in the audience, it was obvious they did not know a lot of the details about Poe's life, so that you filled in gaps. So anyway, go ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
With that being said, I will go to one of the things that I mentioned last night.
Okay.
I have a thing called Fancy Me Mad that I helped to create at St. John's Church in Richmond. Their focus for years since the bicentennial 1975, they've been doing Patrick Henry. And with that being said, there's been a lot of Patrick Henry. And so trying to make the connection with, if we want more people to show up, or if we want the same people to show up for different reasons, maybe we should start opening it up to different events, introducing Richmond's favorite,
absolutely,
Edgar Allan Poe, and because his mother is buried there at St. John's Church, having an event that kind of highlights that and making it more of a family friendly. It's not all dark and brooding, and scary, and putting it in October. We created. And this is a long way to get around to your answer.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. No, we like the information.
But Fancy Me Mad is a line directly from Telltale Heart. Do you fancy me mad?
Yes.
And we created it with the idea of entertaining, educating, but giving you actual information and doing it in a fun way that you wouldn't necessarily know or think about.
Okay.
So it's a self-guided tour. You arrive at St. John's Church before the sun goes down, like I said, family friendly.
Yes.
And you go from spirit to spirit, played by different actors. Some of them are characters, or not characters, people that are actually buried in that cemetery.
Okay.
Some of them are just important to Richmond. Like, for instance, we have mentioned and we have portrayed Benedict Arnold.
Okay.
Not a native of Virginia, but he was the first officer to burn Richmond, and that's why he's kind of important.
Absolutely.
To that kind of story, and it adds something different.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So going from person to person, hearing their stories, going to Eliza Poe's grave and hearing his mother's story before you even get to Edgar at all.
Yeah.
And sometimes we would have Virginia portrayed.
Okay.
Sometimes we'd have Elmira Royster Shelton or other people.
Yeah.
And then it culminates with going inside the church.
Okay.
You get to sit in the church, dim lighting, and you get to listen to Poe read his own work.
That's awesome.
So to answer your question, what's my favorite? since we've developed it, since I have been doing Edgar Allan Poe, it's hard to say which one is my favorite. But I have the ability with Fancy Me Mad to go ahead and pick and choose what I want to read.
Oh, that's nice.
And so it's never, it really is never the same show twice.
Okay.
And even though I do only one 30-minute reading each year, it's become a thing for several years now. I get to pick and choose which one do I want to hear, which one do I want to do, which one do I want to present again. And so that leads me to almost always include Telltale Heart, The Raven. Obviously, people want to hear The Raven.
Yes.
And The Bells.
Okay.
But on the side, I haven't done this because it's a little too long. I like and I enjoy the Fall of the House of Usher.
Yes, it's a great one too.
Right. So to say I like one over the other, I can't say that because I like them all for different reasons.
I agree with you, and a lot of people will ask Jeannie and myself, what is your favorites? And, I always lean to, of course, The Raven, Annabelle Lee. I love the Cask of Amontillado, but the, Usher and Telltale Heart are also my favorites. It's hard to narrow it down because they're all so good.
I can't.
They're all so good.
So I find myself sometimes, some years, doing The Raven and Telltale Heart, or The Raven and The Bells, or, something in that vein, but including different poems. Like, to give you a hint for this year I have found other versions of things, and I'm not saying it's different versions of the same things, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying a different collection of his poems that are not as often read or recited, and so I have others to choose from.
Oh, nice. That's
Which
nice.
is what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
So this year I'm going to try to include those that maybe are not as familiar.
Okay,
that's great. Popular,
that's great.
And try to incorporate some different things.
Yes.
So this one will be different for sure.
Okay, and I loved last night how he started with the poem Alone, and I love that poem, and it embodies him a lot of what he went through with losing so many of the female figures in his life, the father figures in his life, and the unfather figure as well. But it describes him, I think, portraying him as he kind of felt alone some of the time. And so I love that poem for that reason.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's why I started with it this time. I wanted something a little dark because everyone gets the picture of him being dark and brooding.
Yes.
And I wanted something to highlight the first outfit that I was in last night. And I didn't change everything, but it's that picture that we have of the dark, brooding, dark. He's wearing all dark colors, gothic of his time, and reading that before I even started the presentation, really.
Yes.
And then as I open up, try to do romance, which I did yesterday.
Yes.
And
that's a good one too.
Yeah. And it's not as well read or as connected to him because everyone wants to hear the dark stuff, the Raven. Yeah. They want to hear Telltale Heart, Pit and the Pendulum and stuff. Yeah. And he was a romantic.
He was. And the dark stuff, and Jeannie and I have said this many times on we call it our podcast, is a very small % of what he really did when you look at the grand scheme of all his work.
Absolutely.
So, but The Bells is another favorite, and another Poe friend of ours, she writes children's books and has The Bells done in a children's book, and it's really, really cute. Okay. And so we read that last year and talked about it. And I think some people don't realize that's one of the last things that was published. It was published after he died.
Yes. Yeah.
So, but it's a great one. It's a really good one.
Good. Yes.
I was kind of hoping you were going to have time to do that last night, but that's okay.
Well, I didn't realize how far we were going over because I did not bring my cell phone to the presentation like I anticipated doing. Okay. I just totally forgot. Yeah. So that I could keep track of my own time.
Yes.
Which is why at certain points I was like, how much time do we have left?
Yes.
And they just let me go. I was only scheduled for about an hour, and they tell me I did an hour and a half last night.
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
And so with all the questions, I was hoping somebody, especially since I said I brought it with me, that somebody would say, could you please read it?
I should have said said it. I should have said it.
Because there
Yeah.
are things that people want, and there
Yeah.
are different interpretations of the bells. I found one that's just very monotone, bells, bells, almost all the way through, and that's not the way I do it.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm glad because we just started a little addition to season 3 where we're doing words on Wednesday.
Okay.
And the first one we did 2 weeks ago was tintinnabulation. So the word pops up, the definition, and then I have a raven puppet, and so I read just that stanza with tintinnabulation, and it's like I read it as the bells, 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 like very animated.
Yeah, well, I get very animated too.
Yes.
But each stanza I try to do as a different emotion.
Oh, that makes sense. Yes.
So that the first one is all happy and tinkling and da-da-da.
Yes.
The second one, wedding bells. It's not just happy, but it's like that euphoria, because he does talk about a euphoria.
Yes,
And
yes.
the next one, the iron bells, trying to be, a little bit deeper. The alarm bells, I try to be a little bit more loud, boisterous, and it's that you got to get everybody's attention.
Yes.
So I do each one entirely different.
Oh, I bet that's awesome. That's awesome.
And I actually recorded that
Okay.
for the National Cathedral in D.C.
Oh, nice.
And
Okay.
they had an entire event not that long ago. I don't remember exactly when, but they had an entire event where they had different composers that had made songs, made things with the bells in mind.
Oh, nice.
And they had an entire evening of basically Poe, and the theme was the bells.
Okay.
So they had me pre-record reading the way I do, the bells.
Nice.
And then they had me as a surprise show up in costume to walk around and talk to people and be Poe before you see me on the video.
Oh, that is so cool.
And so
That is
I got
so
to
cool.
see the orchestra, the National Orchestra, the cathedral,
That is
the
amazing.
chorus sing and perform these things from different countries, all
that
about
is so
the
cool.
bells, and it was a great evening, wonderful. I've got that video somewhere saved on one of my computers, probably my phone.
Yeah.
But it was great, and I don't
That's
always get a
awesome.
chance to do because I do rotate.
Okay, right.
So even with last night,
Yes.
I made the decision not to do, but I did make it a point to say I brought it with me.
Yes.
And I've got this, and I've got this,
Well,
but it just never came back around because
Yeah.
naturally the conversation was going somewhere else.
Yes, yeah, it did. And I mean, the questions people asked were great.
Oh,
They-
yeah.
They were really good. Another one that I really liked that you did read an excerpt from was King Pest.
Oh,
and
yes.
that's actually in November, Erin Adams, who is the Director of Education here at the Hermitage, is going to be our Gothic guest.
Oh, okay.
And she's going to come on, and we're going to read King Pest on our Poe Unplugged at the end of the month. And
That is great.
So that way we have a Andrew or a Jacksonian historian to talk about the era of Jackson, and
That is great.
Yeah,
That's
so-
great. Yeah, that one's a hard one to read.
it is.
And it's a hard one to follow.
Yes,
And I can honestly say the first time I read it, I was just like, what just happened?
I had to read it
Because
twice.
it's
Yes,
so much.
it is.
And he spends so much time with describing and detailing that you lose track. I did.
Yes,
Of
no,
where
I
the story
agree.
is going, because we're okay. Now I know this character. What is this character doing again?
Yeah.
And so I had to read it a couple of times through to be able to figure out. Oh, this is what he's trying to say.
Yes.
And then following some other people's description to say, oh, that's why we do. Okay.
Oh, but it was
So-
really fun when I can't remember what was it that there was one person towards the end mentioned something because you were like, I'm Poe. You're all Jackson, probably supporters because you're from Tennessee. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but and then somebody made a comment. It was really funny. It was just so funny.
It was, there were a couple of moments like that where I did my presentation as Poe. I made it a point in this particular presentation not to do Q&A before I broke character.
That makes sense.
Because
Makes
sometimes
sense.
I do that when I think that I can talk about and not get too far off topic.
Yes.
And answer questions in character.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, I made it a point to say the reason why really I'm here is because of King Pest, and I'm not going to try to tackle that one in character.
Yeah.
And so I stopped, ended, turned it over to someone who could probably answer more of those questions.
Yes.
And then highlighting the fact that when I was asked to come to Nashville,
Yes.
to Jackson's home, as a person that did not like Jackson,
Right.
this made me laugh, and I had to say, are you really sure I'm the right person to come to this?
Right.
And yeah, that's exactly why we wanted you here.
Exactly.
Really?
Yeah.
So I had to, I don't want to say apologize, but I had to apologize to everyone there. You're probably fans of Jackson, which is why you're here, and Poe was not, so don't get mad at me. You know,
Exactly.
So, and then try
it was
to
just funny. I thought it was great. I thought
Right.
it was really good.
Yeah, I tried to answer it from that point of view.
Yeah, you
so
did.
I'm not here to make friends.
Yes, exactly. As
I'm here
Poe,
to just tell
as
stories.
Poe, yes.
So yeah.
No, that was great. So you have several events coming up, I
Yes.
think. So you want to tell us about some of those?
Sure. And
Okay.
I apologize for being rude. I'm going to use my phone.
Oh, it's all good.
but,
It's all good.
Starting with what's coming up immediate is this coming weekend on the 23rd.
Okay.
I will be Lafayette at Eppington Plantation in Chesterfield. And the Eppington Plantation was owned by the Eppington family, which has a direct connection with Thomas Jefferson.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And I will be there as Lafayette because Lafayette in 1824, 1825, unfortunately brought news with him that Jefferson's child had passed away.
Okay.
And so this was one of those where it's the first time he would have heard about it.
Okay,
And
yeah.
because of news traveling so slow across the ocean.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And so this is one of those that we are doing as a festival to honor not only the Jeffersons, but the Eppingtons. And since there is a Lafayette connection, I will be
Yeah.
there.
Oh, that'll be great.
So that will be the 23rd.
Okay.
Now, the 28th is a Thursday. It's a private event as far as I remember. Forgive me. But it's for Henrico.
Okay.
And it's Henrico Parks and Rec. I will be once again as Lafayette.
Mm-hmm.
So you may have noticed, it's kind of obvious, I am now clean shaven from last night. I don't always get a chance to grow out my real hair to do a Poe. And
Okay. That's an interesting thought I was thinking about.
Right.
Yes.
I have fake mustaches
Okay.
that are close enough if you don't get too close.
Yes.
And I can pull off Poe without having to grow out all the time because
Okay.
sometimes I can't. And in this case, I didn't have anything lined up that would prevent me from actually growing the hair out. But since next weekend I am supposed to be clean shaven as Lafayette, I just went ahead and did it last night.
Gotcha. Okay.
So 2 Lafayettes coming up immediately.
Okay.
Then October, Monday the 2nd, I will go down to Elon University in North Carolina.
Okay.
I've been there before, and it's a adult class, and it's 55 and older.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they have a thing called Life at Elon. It's an extended learning program. It's to get the community involved.
Okay. Yes.
And when I first went down there years ago, I believe the first character that I took to them was Lafayette.
Okay.
And it is designed as a class. So I would spend the first hour of the class doing my presentation as I do. Then we would take a break and come back.
Okay.
And then we would have another hour of just Q&A.
Okay.
And that's the way I structured the class. It's my 2 hours to do. But the first time, I think, was 4 classes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because they just have that many people.
Wow.
And-
That's awesome, though.
Right.
Yeah.
And so for this one, I will be going down as Audie Murphy. And I will be doing the same 2 hours. And at one point, I want to say, I went down there and we did 5 classes because they had enough people. But this year, this coming October, it will be back down to 4 classes. But it's still remarkable. The size of the class is about 100, I would say.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit more. Each class almost full, and then trying to do 4 presentations. So it's 2 on Tuesday, 2 on Wednesday at Elon. That same weekend on the 7th and the 8th, I will be going up to Baltimore to Aunt Muddy's house, which would be Mariah Clem. And it's known even now as the Poe House in Baltimore. So I will be going up there to kind of entertain. And,
for the Poe International Poe Festival, which we will be there, and we will be a vendor.
Right. So with the Poe House, it'll be the first time that I've gone up there, but it's something that new to me, but not new to them, to have a Poe figure there.
Yes.
And to have someone that can stay as long as I can. I think I'm going to be there for the entire thing, which I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. Are you going to have the opportunity to do any of the readings while you're there, or is it more just kind of like be Poe, like talking about Poe's life?
At this point, I don't want to say yes or no to any of that, because I'm not entirely sure what beyond being there they want. But I'm open to the option of doing the readings or what have you. I mean, just like with last night. And now, I don't mind talking about them. So I will be there. Then the next one that I have would be Fancy Me Mad, which I did highlight when we were talking. It is October 21st. It's almost always around the 22nd, that Saturday, whatever that weekend.
So kind of like the third weekend of October, kind of.
Almost always a week before Halloween.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because they don't want to interfere with the kids going out. They don't want to run into issues with other events, people having Halloween parties, etc. And so it really is just to expand the whole Halloween theme for the entire month. So this Fancy Me Mad, we've been doing it, like I said, for several years. I've already explained what we have and what we do. But that is another one that's open to the public. If you want to come, Richmond, the tickets do sell out very fast.
So watch
all
for that
online.
Quickly. I'm going to tell my husband that we definitely need to go to Richmond for that time of year to, and he's sitting here with us. You just can't see him. That we're going to have to make a trip up there for that, because I'd love to see that. Yes. But anyway, go ahead.
And then the last thing, because of knowing history, because of all the stuff that I have done and been involved in, I did mention last night to someone that I'm in more museums than most dead guys.
Yes. That was really kind of a neat thing.
Because of all the filming that I have done, because of my connection with film productions and doing documentaries, docudramas, doing stuff for networks, etc. That stock footage has wound its way into several museums. With my connection, I found Berkeley Plantation, which is Benjamin Harrison's home. His plantation museum, you can tour the house. They have once a year the Berkeley Thanksgiving Festival, which the first Thanksgiving happened in Virginia, not at Plymouth Rock. And that has been documented, well documented. There's a story. It is.
You said JFK put his stamp on it.
Basically. There's a letter, and the letter is framed at the house that says that the president actually did say, yes, you are indeed right, this is the first Thanksgiving. And so with that being said, there's a festival in November. The actual Thanksgiving happened in December, but it's too cold. So in November, that first weekend of November, we do a festival. It's a lot of a couple of vendors that will come down to sell their wares, a couple of people that will just teach you how to play colonial games or that thing, musicians, as well as people that play music, musicians. In various years, you might have the Benjamin Harrison portrayed by an actor. Some years, they would have other people in costumes talking about firearms, etc. Things like that. Vendors for food, so that you're not starving while you're there. And then it wraps up toward the end of the day with a reenactment of the landing, and it's based off of what we know happened, but we also add to artistic license to add some lines to talk about it, to have the gentlemen arrive and then give their thanks, the day of prayer, and then sometimes, depending on the programs, the local Indian tribe, and local by Virginia, will come either before our presentation or right immediately after and do a friendship dance.
Oh, nice.
So it is to show that, they met them and
and just the
helped
blending of
each other,
cultures.
friends right off the bat, the blending of cultures, yes. That's a good way of putting it. But there is a day of thanks for that. And historically, it did happen a year before the one we actually learned in school that happened at Plymouth Rock.
Okay.
So,
Oh, that sounds amazing.
I may or may not be in the production.
Okay.
I am the director
Okay.
of that particular reenactment.
Okay. So you probably wear a lot of hats during the whole event.
Yes, I try to
Figuratively
go
speaking.
to just hang out and play, and especially with my son getting older now.
Absolutely,
8 years old. I like to be with them and making sure that he's entertained and having fun, and see the aspect of what it is to see a show, but also to put it together and put it on its feet.
Yes.
So to get him that inside look of, it's not just watching it and it's perfect that one time. It's, yes, they have to learn their lines. Yes, they have to do this. Yes, they have to do this. And then you see the next day with them all in costume, and that's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
So
that's really neat for a young person to be able to see all that.
right.
Yeah.
So I may not be in the production because I am directing it and being with my son to watch it and show him, yes, this is what we just put together.
Yeah.
To give him that kind of fun inside.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Well, Charles, this has been amazing that we've been able to talk after me getting to see you last night in your performance. Anything else you want to add about yourself, Poe? Anything?
I don't know. I could talk for hours.
Yeah, I could too.
As you could probably tell.
And if Jeannie was here, she'd make it extra hours. So
I don't know. I mean, is there any other questions that you want to know about me?
I can't think of anything. I mean, I think we kind of covered everything. So
Good.
Yeah, and we appreciate you so much taking the time to talk with us. And
Of course.
Can't wait to see you in Baltimore in October. Just a couple weeks away.
Right.
And
Coming up fast.
Yes, and definitely would like to see you in the other roles as well. It'd be really neat to see. So, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, and so for 6 Degrees of Poe, we are Poe out in Nashville.